misty dawn, 5 Union corps along a 7-mile front formed for a grand assault on the Confederate line. All that separated the armies here was a field that had not been plowed in several years. There was no protective cover for the attack. These battle-tested men of the Army of the Potomac knew from hard-won experience the dangers of headlong attacks across open ground. Only sheer courage, determination, and the hope that the Southerners could be quickly overwhelmed gave any assurance of victory. Commands were given. The lines moved forward. An officer in the 139th New York would later write,
"Amid the roar of artillery, the long line of Union troops moved forward to the charge. The advance was made from the cover of a wood across the open space to a line of low breastworks. Our charge was met by the enemy with a murderous fire from hundreds of cannon and from tens of thousands of rifles. Shot and shell, grape and canister, and mini balls mowed the men down in swaths. Our advance was checked. The men falter and fall back with broken ranks before the irresistible storm of lead and iron hail."
in the initial charge, Grant lost about 4,000 men. Another 2,000 fell later in the day. The attack on June 3rd, so long labeled one of the bloodiest assaults in the war, was not even the bloodiest day of the 1864 Overland Campaign. But what sets this famous episode apart is the sense of absolute futility and despair that accompanied the Union repulse.
Okay, we are here at Cold Harbor. The Garthright house is just there between the two trees in the center. And this is the area where actually a lot of the Union 6th Corps, including the 23rd Pennsylvania Volunteers, started off their attack at the Battle of Cold Harbor on May 31st, 1864. Today, a lot of the earthworks and foxholes have been preserved. Now, time has dramatically changed this landscape since the war. But in 1864, much of the Cold Harbor area was cleared farmland. One Federal believed that the openness of the land was the greatest part of the misery. The deadly fire of the Confederate sharpshooters prevented Union soldiers from moving freely behind the lines. There was no cover from fire of the enemy, one veteran observed, except in the trench itself. To move safely between the front and rear, Union troops constructed 6 parallel lines of breastworks. We are currently standing between the 4th and 5th. So the old Cold Harbor Tavern, which was back in this distance, was behind the 5th. Then the 5th was right here. The 4th line of breastworks are right in front of us. Then as you go toward the Garthright house, you got the 4th, the 3rd, the 2nd, the 1st, and then the rebel breastworks of Cold Harbor. I'll try to post a photograph of these lines of breastworks. Not many people get to see a Union foxhole, that was built during the Civil War. But here at Cold Harbor, there are many of them that dot these lines of breastworks, and you can see one right here in front of us. Again, between the 5th and 4th line of breastworks, which these Union troops brilliantly put up just before the Battle of Cold Harbor between May 31st and June 3rd of 1864. The grim drama at Cold Harbor cost some 13,000 Federals and nearly 5,000 Confederates, wounded and captured or killed. Southern morale soared after the battle, while Grant's men were embittered by the lopsided defeat. One Union officer wrote that it was a murderous engagement, and because we were recklessly ordered to assault the enemy's entrenchments. The gallantry, however, of the Union soldiers at Cold Harbor is a powerful testament to their commitment and will. This is a pretty hard way of living, admitted one Northern soldier. But then, if it will put down for this wicked rebellion, I am willing to live this way all summer. Vacating the Cold Harbor trenches on June the 12th, 1864, Grant outflanked Lee by moving to Petersburg, pinning the Confederates to the Petersburg and Richmond defense. Lee had feared such a situation, predicting it will be a mere question of time. So here on June 12th, as Union soldiers are here still on the battlefield, Lee pulls out and moves southward toward Petersburg, ending the overland campaign. The Union front lines lay 325 yards west of here. Reserve troops occupied this ground. These Union rifle pits may have been a stop along the relay system that brought reinforcements and supplies to the forward line. Imagine soldiers huddled inside these trenches with their rifles, canteens, blankets, and haversacks, waiting for the call to the front. The baking down of the summer sun became intolerable, remarked one veteran, that the line of men would canopy the whole trench with their blankets. Overcrowded conditions, poor sanitation, and too few rations allowed sickness and disease to weaken Grant's army. Nearly 3,000 Federal soldiers reported to Union hospitals during the 2 weeks at Cold Harbor. On June 2nd, 1864, the night before the grand assault on Cold Harbor, Union staff officers passed along the battle lines issuing orders. One officer, Major Horace Porter, was in this vicinity when he witnessed a scene of foreboding. Porter recalled, "As I came near one of the regiments which was making preparations for the next morning's assault, I noticed that many of the soldiers had taken off their coats and seemed to be engaged in sewing up rents in them. This exposition of tailoring seemed rather peculiar at the moment, but upon closer examination, it was found that the men were actually writing their names and addresses into slips of paper and pinning them on the backs of their coats, so that their dead bodies would be recognized upon the field, and their fate made known to their families at home. Such courage is more than heroic. It's sublime." We're standing here in front of a Union artillery battery located on a commanding hill about 400 yards behind the front lines. From here, Union officers watched for activity along the Confederate lines and opened with a barrage of shells whenever they spotted a target. Southern cannoneers responded, but their projectiles either ripped into the ground or in front of the Union guns, or passed overhead. Rarely during this 2-week battle were the guns silent. Constant shelling tested the nerves of the soldiers, prompting one to remark, "You would have thought that this whole world had let loose its dogs of hell." Adding to the misery of Union and Confederate soldiers at Cold Harbor was the fear of enemy sharpshooters. Quite often, armed with special rifles, these marksmen would prey on any unfortunate soldier who appeared in their sights. A Confederate officer described their tactics at Cold Harbor. If one caught the glimpse of the enemy anywhere, he would sight carefully at that spot. If someone appeared, he had only pressed his trigger. A soldier from the 15th New Jersey Infantry was killed in this vicinity when he reported to his colonel that he had completed digging a grave for one of his comrades. Instantly, a musket ball struck him in the face, and he fell dying at our feet. He was laid in the grave he had just dug, that we had widened for two. While it was impossible to be certain how the pit that is right here in front of us was used, it is typical of the defensive positions that the sharpshooter would employ their deadly work. Others chose to climb tall trees to be able to spot the enemy movements behind the main lines. And today this is one of the final remaining rifle pits dug in 1864 by Union soldiers, most likely of the 6th Corps, here at the Battle of Cold Harbor. By the time the armies had reached Cold Harbor, soldiers on both sides were adept at building earthworks. These trenches are typical of the works that stretch for nearly 7 miles and define the fighting here at Cold Harbor. Union General John Gibbon wrote, "A few hours were all that was necessary to render any position so strong by breastworks that the opposite party was unable to carry it, and became a recognized fact amongst the men themselves that when the enemy had occupied a position 6 or 7 hours ahead of us, it was useless to take it. And these are the breastworks here, dug by Union soldiers here at Cold Harbor. The earthworks in front of us were home to Union soldiers for 2 weeks during the fighting at Cold Harbor. One federal officer described the suffering that these troops endured, living and working. The work of the entrenching could only be done at night. The fire of sharpshooters was insistent, and no man upon that line could stand erect and live in an instant. This condition of things continued for 12 days and nights. Sharpshooters, fire, both sides went on all day, and all night the zigzags and parallels nearer to the enemy's works were being constructed. In none of its marches by day or night did the army suffer more than these 12 days.